Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the brain. This is part of our Module 5 Part 5 series looking at those plant and animal responses, and in this video we'll be having a look at specification reference 5.1.5H, the structure of the human brain and the functions of its parts. So let's make a start. Okay, when it comes to the key parts of the brain that you need to know for A-level biology, basically there are four key parts: the cerebrum, cerebellum, hypothalamus and pituitary complex, and the medulla oblongata. So what I've given you at the bottom is a little diagram just showing you where these bits are in relation to obviously the outline of the head and the other regions which you don't have to remember. So the cerebrum, first of all, is that big pink blobby bit that's all got all the foldy bits when you look at it. So the majority of what you will see is actually the cerebrum. Okay, the bit that looks kind of like a little leaf sticking off towards the back of the head is the cerebellum. We then have the medulla oblongata, which if you follow up from the spinal cord, you get this little bumpy bit basically, and that's the medulla oblongata, kind of in line with the nose if you get a nose on the diagram. And then if we keep tracking up from there, we're going to find our pituitary gland sitting just in front of the hypothalamus, roughly in the centre of the brain region. So let's take each of these bits of the brain in turn, find out a little bit more about it and what it actually does for us. So cerebrum first of all. Now, as we've already mentioned, the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain in humans. It's about 80% of the total mass of your brain is cerebrum. And the cerebrum is all to do with these conscious activities. So you're using your cerebrum right now to listen to this video and hopefully to think about what we're saying in it as well. I'm really hoping that we're also going to engage our cerebrum to actually store some of this information in a memory. Now, what we actually have in terms of the cerebrum are two halves. So we divide it into those two sides, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And then we've got further subdivisions of the different lobes. Even though our cerebrum is divided up into those two hemispheres, they aren't completely separate. They're actually joined by a little band of nerve fibres, which is the structure called the corpus callosum. And the kind of quirky thing about our brain is that the right side of your brain is going to control the left side of your body and vice versa. So your left hemisphere will control the right side of the body. If we then think about what the brain really looks like, I've given you a picture down at the bottom here. There is a brain. Now, the cerebrum actually has this thin outer layer, which we refer to as the cerebral cortex. And hopefully we're thinking we've heard that word cortex before, and we've heard about it in the adrenal glands, in the kidneys, and the cortex, if you remember, is that layer around the outside. Same thing here. In our brain, this cerebral cortex is called the grey matter. So if we think back to the previous video, we said grey matter is made up of those non-myelinated neurons. What we can see in that picture of the brain is that it's not got a smooth surface on it. You can see there's lots of folds in there. And the reason we've got this highly folded surface of that cerebral cortex is because it increases the surface area. Again, one of those common themes that runs through biology. If we've got a surface that is incredibly folded, it's to increase the surface area. And in this case, that higher surface area means we can get more nerve cell bodies into that same volume. And the reason that that's important is that the more nerve cells we've got, the more possible connections there are that could be made. And if we can make more connections, we can then develop more complex behaviours. So quite simply, if we've got that high degree of folding, that means that we can have more nerve cells, more connections, and therefore more complex behaviours can develop. Underneath that cerebral cortex, if we slice into the brain as we've done in this picture, then you can see that we've got this little region here that shows you the white matter. And if you remember, the white matter is because we have myelinated neurons. Now, you don't need to know all of this. If you do A-level psychology, you've probably done various other bits about the brain, but for the A-level biology, we don't need to know what all the different bits of the brain actually do. This is just to remind you that that cerebral cortex is going to be divided into different areas, and each area has its own kind of area of responsibility. So if we have some kind of damage associated with that cerebral cortex, it really does depend on where in the brain is damaged as to what the effects will be on the person. The second region we've got is the cerebellum. Now the cerebellum, remember, is that leaf-shaped bit towards the back of the head underneath the cerebrum itself. And the cerebellum is all to do with motor coordination, and that includes things like balance and posture. Now, if we just think about balancing, i.e. being able to maintain verticality, that's actually quite a complex operation because it's taking information from a variety of sources, your eyes, the semicircular canals in your ears, muscles, etc., and therefore having to process all of that different information and send information down to obviously make those minor adjustments so you don't just fall down randomly. So because of that, we've got this whole region of the brain dedicated purely to your motor coordination and balance. It is worth mentioning this is all involuntary, so it's all working at a subconscious level. You're not having to consciously think about it to just remain upright. Third region, hypothalamus and pituitary complex. So the hypothalamus and pituitary complex are lumped together because they're actually connected. And what we find is that the hypothalamus is going to be monitoring the blood flowing through it, and then it's going to either release hormones directly or stimulate the pituitary gland to release some hormones to then bring those controls about that are necessary for homeostasis. In terms of the main functions, what we find, regulation of body temperature. So we've already discussed that in a previous video. We need osmoregulation. Again, go back to that link with our kidneys work there, all to do with ADH from the posterior pituitary gland. It's all about regulation of digestive activity, so peristalsis and those gut secretions, that feeling of hunger, all controlled through our hypothalamus there. And obviously the control of various other endocrine functions through that stimulation of the pituitary gland, which releases a range of different hormones. The pituitary gland then, as we've said, has a range of hormones that it can release. Now, these may either directly regulate the body, or those hormones will cause the release of other hormones. So the anterior pituitary is going to produce and release the hormones. The posterior pituitary doesn't produce hormones itself, but it is going to store them. So what we find is ADH and oxytocin, two examples of hormones we've met in a previous video, are actually produced in the hypothalamus and they're released from the posterior pituitary itself. So all I've given you at the bottom is just a little diagram showing you our pituitary gland. So we can see our posterior is on that lighter brown colour, and then the anterior lobe is obviously in front of it. Final bit of the brain we need to know about, the medulla oblongata. Now, medulla oblongata, as we mentioned in that diagram at the start of the video, is located at the base of the brain, just where it joins the spinal cord. And we've got three different centres within the medulla oblongata to do with control of our various body functions. We've got a cardiac centre, all to do with regulating heartbeat, our vasomotor centre, controlling our blood pressure, and respiratory centre, all about breathing rate. So all of these are obviously not conscious actions, they're happening without conscious thought, but they are all regulating very important bits of our body. As always, I hope you found this video useful, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see when the next video is uploaded, and head on over to the website where you can find a range of other resources to help you in your A-level biology studies.